All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Tuesday. Sorry about being a little bit late today. There was apparently someone on the track at the SkyTrain station.
Seriously?
Well, that's what I heard. It was kind of hard. You know, the speakers aren't very good. Did you hear that?
Oh, even the Millennium line was very smooth today.
Yeah.
It was really smooth.
Yeah.
And when like 3 to 4 stations, last 3 to 4 stations before commercial break, the train was packed crazy.
Oh, okay. I thought I heard on the speaker that there was someone on the track at VCC Clark.
Yeah.
And so while they were trying to
jump off?
No, I don't know if they, or maybe they just went down there for, who knows what was going on. I don't know what was going on, but they had to sort of get that person off the track to, yeah, so I think it's backed everything up and, yeah, you know how it is, right? Public transport. Let's say hello to Zartaj, who's here, and Jesse, who's here. Good morning to the two of you. Kayla's here too. Good morning, Kayla. Okay, let's jump into where we were yesterday. So, yes, we were coming off of that article about race and gender in the classroom, and I was trying to kind of make a case to you that, you know, often for these white male students, and maybe for white people in general, or maybe even just, let's make it more general, just for dominant groups, it is difficult for them not to see their version of reality and their values and their beliefs and their perspective on things. It's difficult to not see those as the correct ones, right? Because as I said, there's lots of things that support the dominant group's perspective, right? We said that one of the things that dominant groups get to do is they get to kind of impose their prejudice on society, right? They get to make society in a way that works for them. But of course, the opposite side of that is that when it seems like society is organized according to what works for you, it's easy to think, well, this is the natural way, right? This is the normal way of things. And it's much more difficult to admit that other people don't see things the same way, and other people don't experience things the same way, right? So this is not just a white thing; it's more of a dominant group thing. But here with white supremacism, I wanted to take just a minute to look into kind of how these guys operate, because especially in the States, there is, you know, there's lots of accusations of white supremacism and white nationalism. Some of those accusations are probably correct and founded, but I think it's worth talking about because obviously there's an issue with race in the United States as there is elsewhere, but there's an issue with race in the United States, but there's also something going on, right? There's kind of a culture, you know, at the very least, a culture war going on. Hopefully not a civil war or anything, but there's kind of a culture war going on. People are kind of on one side or the other, and they're, you know, fighting and yelling at each other. Sometimes people are getting killed, and it's kind of worth exploring maybe just a little bit of what's going on down there with regard to white supremacism, okay? So, what I have for you is a very quick article to read. It's not very difficult. It's much easier to read than the last one and much shorter. And I've just got a few questions for you to read. But I'm going to say, I just want to look at these questions here. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4, 6, and 8. I want you to do numbers 1, 2, 4, 6, and 8 only. Okay? So don't worry about those other ones. I think when I was originally making up questions for this article, I thought those questions were a good idea, and then I later found out they weren't. So just do those. I'm just going to move this out of the way here if I can. There we go. So take some time and read this article, and then we'll talk a little bit about what it what it means, okay, and what kind of things we can take from this. Because I have something else to show you, which is some video, and this will help kind of set it up, okay? Although I think I might have to put it into Microsoft Teams, so just give me 10 seconds here and I will do that. So, all right, should be there. It's called White Supremacy, an Overview. All right, so yeah, articles in Microsoft Teams there. I'll give you some time to read and then we'll discuss, okay? Okay, good people. Ready? All right. So, there's lots of information in here. There's lots of detail. There's lots of different hate groups and sort of white supremacist organizations, which is actually kind of terrifying. But let's try and sort of pull from this what we need. Okay. The first question is what's one of the major causes of domestic terrorism in the U.S. today? Or who is the cause?
Like, how do you say it? Supremacy, is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah, it's white supremacists,
Yeah,
right?
that one.
Which is a little bit ironic, right? Because I think, not ironic, but I think if you asked most Americans, for instance, if you went up to them and you said, okay, close your eyes and imagine a terrorist, what do you think they would be imagining? What kind of person? What would that person look like? The person that most Americans imagine as a terrorist. From what?
I feel bad if I say it.
No, that's why I'm saying this is not what you think, but what do you think most Americans would think?
A Muslim?
Yeah, they would probably think of a Muslim person, right? They would probably, maybe they'd think of a guy kind of in robes with a big beard, right? Maybe like a suicide bomber or something like that. Yeah, that's probably who would come to mind, right? And again, I'm not saying that it's right, of course, but if you asked most Americans, that's who they would picture. That's the picture that would pop into their head, right? And of course, to some degree, that's not surprising, right? The 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center was a big moment for the United States in a lot of ways. But also, movies have supported that as well, right? There's lots of movies and TV shows that kind of portray Muslims and people from the Middle East in a particular way, right? So the Americans would probably jump and think, oh, okay, I know what a terrorist looks like, right? But very interesting to see that if you look at the history and if you look at the statistics, most of the domestic terror attacks in the United States have been perpetrated by white people, by white men, right? So again, if you walk up to an American and you say, okay, close your eyes and picture a terrorist in your mind, they should be picturing someone who looks more like me, right? Not like Osama bin Laden, right? Because the history and the statistics show you that in fact, yes, there have been terror attacks that have originated elsewhere in the world, but for the most part, it's been white supremacists who have been the dominant terrorists in the United States for, roughly 150 years at least, right? And here in the article, they mention going all the way back to Abraham Lincoln, right? The U.S. president who issued the Emancipation Proclamation, who helped to free slaves in the United States, he was killed. He was assassinated for it. It's a big kind of historical event in sort of the American story where Abraham Lincoln is shot. He goes to a theater in the evening to watch a play, and John Wilkes Booth shows up with a gun and caps him. Although they didn't cap people in 1865, they just shot them. Capping comes later. But yeah, there's a really long history of domestic terrorism in the United States carried out by white people, right? So again, I think it's kind of interesting that most Americans would think of someone else when they think of what does a terrorist look like, right? Because again, in the U.S., terrorists look like white people for the most part. That's historically that has been the case. Prior to, I don't have any photos handy, but prior to the World Trade Center, I was going to say bombing, but it's not really a bombing if you fly a plane into it, but prior to 9/11, the most destructive act of terror in the United States was committed by a guy named Timothy McVeigh, a very white guy who was upset about how the government handled the FBI raided the farm that a cult was operating out of in Texas, in Waco, Texas. Timothy McVeigh was upset about that. He was a former U.S. Army veteran, and so he filled a rental truck with ammonia and explosives and parked it outside of an office building in Nebraska. I think it was Omaha, Nebraska, and basically destroyed half of the building and killed and injured a lot of people. So prior to 9/11, that was the kind of biggest terror attack in the United States, but perpetrated by a white person, right? And so, again, there have been, 9/11 was a thing, and it was a big thing for Americans. But looking back, we see that there's a lot more terrorism in the United States. Has a white face. It doesn't have a brown face or anything else. Okay. As is sometimes my bad habit, I think I kind of answered number 2 without meaning to. Whoops. Sometimes that happens. Well, the thing is that the questions kind of follow my line of thinking, right? And so, yeah, if I'm not careful, I'll just follow it. So, yeah, it challenges it because, again, their social messaging teaches them that terrorists look a certain way, right? And terrorists come from a certain place. Sorry. Terrorists come from a certain place, but again, the history doesn't support that, right? For the most part, terrorists come from America, or American terrorists come from America, and they look more like me than they look like Bin Laden. Number 4. I guess I wanted to ask you about this. I didn't want to go too deep into the abortion thing, but it was interesting to see it kind of show up here, because usually we don't think of, there are some people that are pro-abortion, right? Pro-choice. Some people who are pro-life, they're against abortion. But usually we don't see it popping up in a discussion about race. But here it kind of shows up. Why is this issue kind of showing up here? We all know what abortion is, right? Okay. Why is it showing up here? Or do you have no idea?
I think to save white race,
Sorry, say that again?
to save the white race.
Right. Yeah, there are white supremacists who feel that their race is under threat, right? And so abortions are, terminating pregnancies, so there'll be less white children born. And some people feel that that's a threat to just a threat to the population of white people, period, right? Anything else that we can add to that? Why else is this abortion issue kind of popping up here? What is it? Abortion is when you end a pregnancy on purpose. Yeah, so if you become pregnant and you decide that you don't actually want to be, it was a mistake, you can terminate that pregnancy. Yeah. Again, some people are in support, some people are not.
And it can lead to fights if both people have different opinions. If you talk about it.
Well, that's true, right? People, why are people so? Why do people have such strong views about this issue? Do you think? It's a responsibility. What? Yeah. Yeah. So if you have that child, if you have that baby, you're signed up for a lot of commitment, right? Like, not even 18 years, probably like a lifetime of support, right? In theory. Uh, here you feel like it's more what? Yeah. Yeah, it's some something kind of, yes, this is a tangent, but something kind of strange has happened here where kids have less kind of freedom and autonomy than they used to. And so, I think part of it is computer games, right, which keep kids inside much more. And computer games are, of course, way better than they were 20 or 30 years ago, right? But yeah, kids don't really play outside independently anymore. And I think there's probably a few reasons for that. But yeah, you're right. There's much uh, kids are much less independent here than yeah. Well, you definitely you are responsible for your kids, right? But it's yeah, there's people are well, definitely yes. Oh yeah, definitely yes, right? So Canadian provinces have child services where yeah, if the kid is not being cared for, the government will take them and figure out if they can return the kid or if they have to put the kid into foster care. Or that's true. That's true. Yeah. So I think the last question I asked was why do people have such strong opinions about abortion? Number one, yes, you have to kind of commit to this caring for this child for a long time, right? Why else do people have strong opinions about this? Uh, like they might be scared to have a baby. Yeah, they. So yeah, again, being pregnant and having a kid is a life-changing experience, right? And ideally you're having that life-changing experience because that's what you want, right? Ideally you have chosen to do that and you're happy with that change in your life, right? But of course lots of people get pregnant by accident, right? They're not really meaning to. Um, yeah, why else do people have strong opinions, do you think?
It's seen like a sin in some religious beliefs, and some people might think that it's murdering the child inside. Some might think that it's still baby in the stomach, it's like nothing, or like what.
Yeah, people's kind of perceptions of what this activity is are very different, right? And religion has a role to play, of course, right? Many religions, particularly Christian religions, oppose abortion, right? They view a fetus or a baby or whatever it is at the time, they view that as a creation of God, right? And so you aren't allowed to destroy something that God created, right? And so, unless it's the environment. But anyway, sorry, that's another thing. Yeah, so religious belief has an important part of this, and how you frame it is important as well, right? Is this the murdering of a baby? Gosh, that sounds awful, right? Is it the ending or termination of a pregnancy? Well, that doesn't sound quite so bad, right? But it depends how you think of it and how you frame it, right? And so there's lots of kind of values and beliefs and religious ideas and that kind of get mixed into this debate on abortion. But yeah, I guess it's weird to see it come up here, but maybe not, right? Because a lot of these white supremacist groups have Christianity as an important part of their identity, right? They're white, but many of them are also pretty strongly Christian, right? And so they might oppose abortion because it reduces the number of white children, right? But they also might oppose it just because, their religion says it's wrong, right? Maybe. What are white supremacists fighting for? Oh no, sorry. What are the basic tenets of white supremacist belief? What do they kind of believe? And I think there was there was 5 things. What was the first thing? That was number 6. There was 5 basic tenets.
Oh, can I read it?
Sure.
5 of it. White Europeans and descendants of white Europeans around the world are genetically and
Innately, yeah.
innately superior to other races and do not include Jews.
Right. So the first one is that white Europeans and descendants of white Europeans are genetically superior to other races. What do we know about that? Is that true? Is that a true statement? This is not a hard question. It's true that white Europeans are superior to other races? That we're better? Am I better than you?
Some might think that way.
Well, they think that way. No, but we know that's not true, right? Yeah, we know this is not what they believe. This is what is true, right? So we know there are no human races, right? Race is not a biological reality. And what's up? I don't know. Yeah, so we know that races don't exist, and we know that no race is superior to another, even if they did exist, right? So this is kind of not true, although they believe it to be true, but it's not true. What's number 2 there, Eunice?
Number 2 is white Europeans, as they define the term, and their descendants in the U.S. are under immediate threat of extinction from multiculturalism.
Right. In other words, genocide. So they believe that white Americans are in the process of being exterminated, right? They're in the process of being genocided away. Does that sound true to you? No. That's ridiculous as well. That's not happening, right? They're not really under threat. They're a pretty solid majority. They're not really going anywhere anytime soon. That's ridiculous. What's number 3 there, Eunice?
What's ID?
In other words.
Oh.
Yeah. It stands for something Latin, but I can't remember what the Latin words are. Yeah.
Members of their race, in other words, white Europeans and their descendants are being victimized in a world that they perceive to be in great danger of collapse.
Right. So they feel that white people are being victimized, right? And I think we've kind of spent enough time here in the racism unit to know that that's not really the case, right? White people are the dominant group. I'm sure that, you know, there are some white people out there that are being victimized in one way or another, and that's not okay. But as an entire race, I don't think that's happening, right? What's the fourth one there, Eunice?
Non-white groups should either be eliminated, subordinated, or segregated.
Yikes. Right? So
It's harsh.
yeah, no. So non-white people should be eliminated. Yikes, that sounds like the Holocaust. Subordinated, so put in a lower position, right? Or segregated. They should be separated from white society. Yikes. And then the last one?
Society should be constructed in accordance with a
Patriarchal.
patriarchal, racist, and heterosexual
Paradigm, yeah. So here they're saying that, yeah, society should be white. Society should be, you know, white people should have power, men should have power, heterosexuals should have power. Right? That's the way society should be organized. White male, straight white males are the people who should have power. People of color, gay, lesbian people, women, they all have to take a back seat, right? And some of them have to just get out altogether, right? So again, there's some racist things happening, but there's also some sexist things happening. There's also some heterosexist things happening. Yeah, that's kind of what these guys are thinking about, right? Last question, then we'll take a quick break. What distinguishes white supremacism, white nationalism, and the alt-right? What's the difference between these, or who are these groups? Just in a very short sentence. Do I what? Well, that's one of the white supremacist groups. But what's the difference between white supremacism, white nationalism, alt-right?
Here it's under the category ideologies. I'm not sure.
Okay. What do you have there, Eunice? Oh yeah, under ideologies.
Yep. The three of it there.
Right. So what does it say for white supremacy?
Like sometimes white supremacy is the general belief that white people supremacists are enabling superior to people of other races.
Right.
People from other races, they are superior to them.
Right. So white supremacists in general believe that white people that race is a thing, and of course the white race is better than, more superior than all of the other ones. Right? That's just the sort of the most basic kind of definition of what a white supremacist is. What's a white nationalist, though?
The national identity of white people should be built around only white people.
Right.
They superior to other nationalities.
Right. So this has to do more with kind of political power, right? So it's the idea that, again, white people are the best, but that the nation should be built around white people, right? White people should be in power. We should be observing white holidays, right? The society should be constructed in a way that reflects white culture and white values and white beliefs, and white people should hold the power in that society, right? And again, I think there's probably lots of kind of white nationalists out there, right, who are, you know, they're not skinhead neo-Nazis, right, but they kind of subtly believe that, you know, the white way is the right way, right?
Yeah.
What about the alt-right? What's the alt-right?
Reaction and alternative to mainstream conservatism.
Right, and so I'll talk about this conservative liberal thing with you very shortly. So they're kind of further out, right? They're more extreme than most conservatives. And what do they support? These alt-right people sometimes. They what?
Community.
Community? Well, they are a community, kind of. Actually, I wouldn't even go that far.
They support white supremacy, isolationism, and the manosphere, and other ideas centered on inequality.
Right. So they tend to be white supremacist. They tend to be white isolationist. So they don't really want the U.S. to be too involved in global affairs. They want the U.S. to kind of mind its own business. What do they oppose? What do these alt-right people not like?
Feminism,
Feminism?
multiculturalism,
Multi-
and much of the mainstream media, immigration, and
Yeah, so these guys are kind of pushing back against all kinds of things, right? Feminism, multiculturalism, sometimes against gay and lesbian rights. Sometimes they're pushing back against things like Black Lives Matter. Sometimes they're pushing back against the media as a whole, right? They think the media is all corrupt or liars or whatever. Sometimes we have a few kind of internet trolls mixed in there who just like to say things to upset people. It's just a collection of people who share some of the same ideas but not all of the same ideas, but a lot of those ideas are kind of really negative and sort of toxic. But I'll tell you what, I'll explain that in a little more detail, but why don't we take a quick break, and then when we come back I'll explain that a bit more, and then I'll show you something. Okay? Okay, and we're back. So, I'm kind of having a moment of, like, do you think it's worth, well, do you think it's worth talking about white supremacists in a social justice class? Like, is it worth, like, talking about people who are kind of on the other side, right? Like, here we are in a course about equality and equity and minoritized groups and people who are disadvantaged. And here we're kind of spending time talking about people who think they're maybe disadvantaged, but maybe are not quite correct about that. But is it worth talking about those people? Is it worth spending time on this? What do you think?
I guess so, because we get to learn more about other things that we might not have known before.
True, although that could be said of anything, really.
Yeah.
We can learn, we are knowing why the minoritized groups are in disadvantage. But we also need to know that who are in advantage and who they think they are. Why they think that way. What we need to know.
Yeah, maybe.
We need to see both sides of the coin.
Yeah, maybe it is worth looking at both sides of the coin, at both sides of this story, even if one side of this story is they're just wrong, right? Like we know that, like, some of the things we just went through, those 5 things that white supremacist groups believe, and they're not based in fact, right? There is no difference between races. White races are not superior. You know, they're not under threat, you know, of genocide or anything. Like, we know that's just not happening, right? And so
They wouldn't be having a
they wouldn't be having a what?
strong tradition.
Yeah. Yeah.
All their values are like on just no fact. There is no fact.
Yeah. Yeah. There are no facts here, right? But why do people continue to believe anyway? Right? Okay. Well, let me go a little bit further and see how this goes, okay? One of the things I don't want to be associated with fascism, so I'm just gonna move myself. I'm gonna move myself over here, actually. It seems safer. Okay. So I wanted to show you this, the political spectrum. Have you ever seen this before?
No.
No? Some people have seen this before. This is kind of a useful thing to see and to know and to understand, right? Because you'll hear people talk about this a lot with regard to politics, and especially with what's happening in the United States today, because they are so polarized. They're so on one side or the other, right? There's the liberals on the left and the conservatives or the Republicans on the right, right? There's the alt-right, there's the alt-left. It's getting really crazy, right, as people are kind of on either side of this spectrum. And what it is, to make it really simple, what this kind of spectrum is it talks about how people, in general, it talks about how people view the role of government in their society, okay? There's lots of other things attached to this political spectrum, and there's lots of ways in which people can think about it, but it has to do with people's attitude toward the government. What kind of government do you want? Okay? So if we went to the left, let's say, you would find a government that people are very comfortable with the government playing a big role in their economic life. Okay? So people on the left like things like government programs, right? So pension plans, retirement plans, social programming, disability pensions, university support or subsidies, maybe free university funded childcare, funded parental leave and maternal leave. All of those things are kind of left-wing ideas. And people who are out on the left like the idea of the government providing those things. Okay? Of course, taxes usually go along with that because you need tax money to pay for all of those programs. But people on the left are usually okay with that. Okay? So people on the left usually are okay with the government playing a very strong role in their lives, kind of economically. Right? But on that same side, they feel that the government should have a very little presence in their social lives. Okay? So they kind of feel that, and as a result, they're very accepting of difference, usually. Right? So people on the left are usually more in favor of multiculturalism, they're in favor of immigration, they're usually supportive of things like gay marriage and LGBTQ issues and transgender people. People on the left tend to be less religious, not all the time, but sometimes, usually. And so they kind of don't want the government to be too concerned with their social lives, right? They're okay with lots of diversity in terms of race, ethnicity, sexuality, gender, and the government really shouldn't get involved in those things, right? The government should, accept that people are different, okay? So that's people on the left. People on the right are kind of the opposite, and so they feel that government shouldn't play a big role in people's economic lives, right? So they feel that government should set some regulations and then basically stay out of the way, right? Let business operate, let business make money, let people go out there and make money, and if they want more money, they should get a better job or just work harder. They're not as in support of social programs. They feel that people should kind of take care of themselves, right? If instead of free healthcare like we have here in Canada, which is a left-wing idea, by the way, instead of that, you should buy your own health insurance, right? That way you can buy the type of health insurance you want, or if you don't want any health insurance, you don't have to buy any at all, right? The point is that other people aren't paying for your choice, right? So you can do what you want. So there's kind of an element of personal freedom in there. So they kind of favor low taxes, low government involvement, less social programs. But on the other side, they tend to be a little more involved in people's social lives. So they tend to be kind of more nationalistic. They tend to be more traditional. They tend to want to sort of preserve tradition and make sure that things stay the way they are. Sometimes they're tougher on crime, right? They feel that criminals must be punished, kind of thing. Not that people on the left don't feel that, but people on the right are generally tougher on crime. People on the right are more often religious. Not always, of course, but more often they are. And there's also a bit of a divide in terms of urban and rural and old and young, okay? So young people tend to be more left-wing. They tend to be more liberal. Old people tend to be more right-wing, tend to be more conservative. People who live in the countryside, out away from the cities, they tend to be more conservative on average. People who live in cities tend to be more liberal, right? Again, doesn't work for everybody. Everyone's a unique person, but you often see these kinds of patterns, and you see them really in most countries, right? People who live in the countryside are generally more conservative than people who live in the cities, who are more kind of, relaxed and accepting of difference, right? So this is kind of a useful way to kind of understand what people's kind of values are for government and for society. Again, in the States, we've got Democrats and Republicans, and the Democrats are kind of out on the left. Republicans are on the right, although the Republicans are leaning pretty far right nowadays. I think I may have to move them from where they are and move them further right. If you look at Canada, Canada's got, the Liberals are basically right in the middle for Canada. They're right in the middle of the spectrum. The NDP is further out to the left. The Conservative Party is on the right. I would say Canada kind of leans a bit left on average. I feel we're kind of a left-wing country, and so we just lean a little bit to the left. I kind of feel like the US leans a little bit to the right on average, but then they're so split that some people are very strongly left-wing and strongly right-wing. Right? So when we talk about people in the alt-right, we're talking about people who are on the right wing here, but they're way, way out there, right? So they're further out than the Republicans, they're further out than the Conservative Party, and they tend to have very kind of extreme views about some of these things, which we've just read about, right? So they're not, so interested in diversity, they're not really interested in immigration, they're not really interested in LGBTQ issues, and not only do they want to preserve tradition, but they kind of want to go back to an imaginary time. Good morning. They kind of want to go back to a time when, they have this idea that the U.S. used to be kind of this perfect white country, and then it has since, gotten worse with all this immigration. But the U.S. was never really a completely white country, nor was it ever perfect. But it's this imaginary thing that these people want to go back to. But anyway, this is kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about alt-right or right-wing. We're talking about people's kind of general views towards things, right? And again, you can see these patterns really in any country you go to. There'll be people who are more conservative. There'll be people who are more liberal. And maybe the other thing I'll mention too is that you can be two things, right? So you can be economically conservative and you can be socially liberal, right? So you might say, yes, I want low taxes. I don't want the government interfering in my life. I don't want to pay for a bunch of social problems. But at the same time, or programs, sorry, but at the same time, I'm okay with diversity, right? Lots of immigration, that's good. LGBTQ, fantastic. I'm all good with that. But I want the government to behave in a conservative way in terms of economics. So people can be a mix of both, right? They can be economically or fiscally conservative, but then they can be socially liberal, right? What's that? Yeah, and so the center is kind of a compromise of the two, right? People who, you can see that tradition is important, but sometimes we need to change things, right? Government should play a role only when it improves the lives of citizens. Law and order are important to encourage people to protect the rights of individuals. So it's a bit of a middle ground. And the other thing is that I think in most countries you go to, and certainly in Canada, I can't speak for the US right now, really most people are in the middle, right? And so if you have a right-wing party and a left-wing party, they're going to be left and right, but they're going to be really close to the center, right? Because that's where everybody is. If you start the Communist Party of Canada and you run in an election, you're going to get like 200 votes, right? Because just nobody is out there, right? There are just almost no communists, people that want communism in Canada, right? Everybody is in the middle somewhere, a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right, right? And so, Justin Trudeau's party is a slightly left party, kind of, but not very far. Like it's just, if it's not dead in the center, it's just slightly to the left. Right? Jagmeet Singh's NDP party, a little bit further left, but not super left, right? Because the further out you go, kind of the less votes there are out there, right? There's just not a lot of communists in Canada. There's not a lot of fascists in Canada, right? So you're just not going to get any votes. Okay, so, so people on the right, again, are not bad people. It's okay to want a fiscally conservative government. It's okay to want to protect your traditions, right, and your way of life. And again, as people grow older, that's often what they want to do, right? They want to keep things the same. They don't want too much change, right? They want to keep things the same. Now, but again, the alt-right are kind of further out there, right? So they've got some things in common with conservatives, right, with people on the right, but kind of to an extreme degree, right? And so often they've got some toxic ideologies. Sometimes they're misogynists, right? So they have a strong prejudice against women. Sometimes they're homophobes, or they're strongly resistant of homosexuality and sort of transgender people. Sometimes they're very strongly against immigration. Sometimes they're very strongly racist. Sometimes they're anti-democracy. Sometimes they're anti-media. Sometimes they're all of those things, or maybe just some of them. Some people are in there just because they like to cause trouble and say things that upset people. You know, look at the comments section of anything,
Yeah.
right? So it's very easy to find internet trolls out there. So there's just a collection of people that kind of fit into this category. They believe some of the same things, but not all of the same things. And they're generally just like exhausting. They make life difficult. But anyway, that's just my opinion. And recently, what we found is that people on this side of the political spectrum, especially far out on the right, they're kind of making themselves more known. We're hearing from them a lot more. Okay. One of the things that's probably allowed that to happen has been Donald Trump. I think that Donald Trump probably shared a lot of beliefs with people on the alt-right. Sometimes he was smart enough to keep them to himself, and sometimes he wasn't. And again, we've talked about that before, right? When somebody stands up, especially someone with power, stands up and says something that's kind of racist or kind of sexist, it makes space for other people, right? And other people can stand up and say racist and sexist things too, right? Because, well, the president said it, so why can't I? Right? And so people start to stand up and say what they think, right? And again, it works the other way too, right? If people with power stand up and say things that are inclusive and equitable and accepting, then it makes space for others to stand up and do that as well. But of course, Trump kind of did the opposite, and so it emboldened these people, right? They felt that they had someone supporting them, and the President of the United States, no less. One of the things, and I guess I'll probably show this to you tomorrow, one of the places where this kind of boiled over was here in Charleston, South Carolina. Charlottesville, South Carolina. Okay, so that's kind of in the southeastern United States. It's a little bit north of Florida, if you want to know. And it had to do with this statue here. So everything kind of boiled up around this statue. This is a statue of Robert E. Lee. Okay, and Robert E. Lee was a general in the Civil War, the U.S. Civil War. If you know anything about American history, you'll know that the U.S. had a civil war in the first part of the 1800s. It was about a number of things, but one of the major things they were fighting about was whether or not they should continue to keep slaves. Okay, so the states, the southern states, wanted to continue to keep slaves because they were using them to grow cotton and other things on plantations, and so they were making money off that. The states in the north didn't agree with that. They thought that slavery should be abolished and you shouldn't be able to own people. Okay? The two groups of states couldn't agree, and they actually had a civil war over it. It ended, I think, in 1864 or 65. The northern states won, and of course, shortly after, slaves were freed. Right? They were in 1865. Abraham Lincoln frees the slaves, or that's the very simple version of the story. So Robert E. Lee here was a general in that war, but he was on the southern side. He was on the Confederate side. And so again, the Confederate states were fighting for the right to be able to keep slaves and use them as forced labor on their farms, right? So here he is, a statue of him in the center of town on his horse. And a controversy kind of erupted around it because as time went on, people kind of looked at him and said, you know, is he really the kind of guy that we should put on a pedestal, literally, right? Because when you make a statue of someone, it's usually because we look up to them, right? They're a hero, right? They're an important historical figure. They're someone we look up to as an inspiration. But should we really look up to this guy? Like, he was fighting to make sure that he could continue to have African slaves as possessions, right? That's what he was fighting for. Should we be looking up to this guy? Maybe not, right? Maybe we should rethink this. Maybe we should take this statue down and replace it with something else, right? Because how do you think it feels? You know, pretend for a moment that you live here in Charlottesville, South Carolina, and imagine you're a black person. Or maybe you are and you don't have to imagine it. But imagine you're a black person living in this town. How does that feel when you walk by this statue and see that, you know, the person that the town holds up as a hero fought very hard to make sure that you had no rights and no freedom? Fortunately, he lost, but how does that feel? Right? Yeah, right? Like imagine walking by a statue of Hitler. You know, and again, you got to be careful with comparisons to Hitler. Lots of people like to compare things to Hitler. Not a lot of things are like Hitler, so you really shouldn't compare them. But it almost seems ridiculous, right, to have a statue of someone who most people agree is awful, right? And yet here we have someone who, you know, for many people is awful. And there he is, sitting there on top of his horse, looking down on people for decades, right? And again, is he the kind of person we want to put on a pedestal? Is he the kind of person we want to look up to? And lots of South Carolinians, never said that before. Lots of people in South Carolina were saying, no, I don't think he's the kind of person that we want to look up to. Maybe we should take the statue down, right? And so the process of talking about that led to many people becoming very upset, right? Some of these alt-right people, white supremacist people, they felt that this was an attempt to erase history, right? Removing Robert E. Lee was erasing history and sort of challenging their traditions and their identity. And so that led to a number of protests around this monument here. And I have some video to show you, but obviously I'm going to leave it till tomorrow because we have 3 minutes left. So I'll pause there. We'll come back to this tomorrow, and we'll look at the kind of controversy and the sort of demonstrations that erupted because of this statue, because of the idea of discussions about maybe we should take this thing down. Maybe this is not the kind of person we want to hold up as an inspiration to us. Okay? But we'll deal with that tomorrow. Okay. That is all, good people. You can pack it up, and I'll see you tomorrow, okay?